Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Days, and you're about to watch Thorin rant for about 3 hours.
Time for another one of my monthly AMAs that I host on my Patreon, where people who donate $10 or more can ask a question, and assuming it's a applicable, relevant, interesting question, I'll go ahead and answer it. So, as usual, I double check that everyone's actually paid for the month. If they haven't, I save their question, I check the next month, and I include the question there. So we're actually going to start with a question that came from that exact process. It technically was for last month's Patreon AMA, but he hadn't yet pledged because he pledged during the month, and you only get charged at the very beginning of the next month. So it was from Impulsive, and it said, people like you and Lurpis have on multiple occasions referenced the player Ruiz when talking about 1.6 players, but there isn't really any information online to find out about him outside of a couple of references in your old articles, and the amount of demos and frag movies is quite scarce. How great was he really when compared to the greats like Forrest and Neo, and how high would he rank in your list of greatest 1.6 players of all time? Right, so the reason why there isn't a lot of information is because he was a Finnish player, and he was someone who, funnily enough, except with me, because on camera with me, I did a few interviews, I think like 3 interviews in WEM 2009. Generally, he wasn't like a very... there wasn't social media really back then, but he wasn't someone who was like a very front-facing player. He's just someone who played, didn't really give a fuck about interviews or fans caring about him, just played the game, and that's about it. Now, he definitely was an extremely good player. He's one of the best players in the world during most of his active years. We're talking like 2006 to about 2009, off and on activity after that. He's someone where I think, I'm not entirely sure, but if I can find it, I'll link it below. I did like a top 10 Finnish players of all time in 1.6. I think he's number 1 on the list because he was arguably the most skilled Finnish player of all time. I think contending with him would be people like Plaste had pretty fucking insane aim. I think Narsu got to be one of the most skilled players. If we're going back in time, Zitor from the early days. Perhaps Tico is a pretty skilled player. I think that's a pretty solid roundup. The thing about him, and the reason why Lurpis always references him, is because he was the main star of Lurpis's best teams, which were the 69N, 28E, Rockat, what else were they called? Gameplay towards the end, those squads. Now, the thing about Ruiz is he was an incredibly double-edged sword type player because he really was a player who was incredibly aggressive. The only comparison I could give you would be like Simple in CSGO, except Simple is better at it and smarter at it. Ruiz was a ludicrously aggressive player. So even on the CT side, he's pushing all the time. He's trying to take aim duels. If he gets a kill, he pushes for the second kill. If he gets 2 kills, he pushes for the third kill, even if he has 10 health. And there was a level of genius to that. Not quite to the level of Simple, like I said, because Simple's made it efficient. That's what's fucking retarded. But you look at a player like Ruiz, what would happen is his skill level was very high and he had this very aggressive playing style. So when it worked, he won you the whole game by himself, but he also lost a lot of games for you and he also could be a liability. And what made it work in these lineups when it did, because there was certainly like a top 5 team, top 10 team most of the time they played with like a serious dangerous threat to go to big semi-finals and finals. What made it work was that he was balanced by an equally double-edged sword, one-dimensional player on the other end of the style of spectrum of play, with a player called Conte, who wasn't like a super skilled player, but was a very good player, very good all-round player, and was an incredibly passive player to the extent that he was a massive beta. So by having the massive beta, but really safe player, very defensive player, and the super aggro, way too aggressive player with Ruiz, the two of them together, you had to just let them do their own thing, but they balanced out their ends of the spectrum. Then Narsu was right in the middle, and then you had someone like Plaste, a little bit more aggressive, Lurpis filling in the holes, and so it was a very good squad, actually. They didn't, sadly, quite make the breakthrough to win enough championships. They were behind the Fnatics, the MTWs, the Poles, etc. in their time, but they were very highly ranked and they were a very good squad, and he was, I would say, the best player overall, even though he's a player I wish could have shored up a little bit of that weakness, and I think could have been a much more effective player as a result, because yes, people like Zet and Forrest were very aggressive, but they at least tempered it a bit, and they at least played around their teams a little bit, or worked with players. He was a bit more of a lone wolf in that respect. So sadly, not that many demos of him out there, at least not from his most insane games. Very few frag movies, because again, he wasn't Swedish, he wasn't American, so he didn't have the same level of popularity. In terms of like an all-time 1.6 list, that's a tough one because his accomplishments aren't that great compared to so many of the Swedish players that have all the championships and medals in their back pocket. Even compared to the great Norwegian players, he didn't have that many great accomplishments. Like, for example, in majors, he didn't go very deep very often. Definitely never won one. I think I'm going to have to say he'd be in the top 100, absolutely. Top 50, I think so. My gut tells me yes. Once we start to narrow it down further, you have to understand, we played 12 years of CS 1.6. There were a lot of fucking amazing players, individual star players, the kind of players who should be on greatest 1.6 players. So I think top 50 is safe, but I think anything beyond that, I'd really have to figure it all out. I still plan on doing one of those lists one day and still doing all the rest of the country ones nation by nation. So it's just side content I'm going to have to come up with. We'll see how it goes. Right, the very same Impulsive asked a question for this month. So I guess technically I should bump him to the next one because did he pay for this one? I guess technically you're getting two questions here, but you know what? I'll give you this one. So I'm going to assume this guy must be Finnish because there's another question about a Finnish player. He says, now that Seral who's the Zerg player in StarCraft 2, plays friends, has won GSL. I mean, listen, he has won a GSL tournament, but it was GSL versus the world. If you say GSL, the implication there for most people is going to be it's GSL Code S, which is the hardest and the best tournament to win in StarCraft. So he won GSL versus the world, certainly a very good tournament, but not GSL Code S. Is it accurate to call him the best foreigner of all time in StarCraft 2? Right, I think Seral is a contender for that. I think Neeb also can be put up there because of their accomplishments, winning these big tournaments that featured some of the best Koreans, even beating some of the best Koreans to win these tournaments. Yes, the problem Seral has is when you talk about best foreigners of all time, the two big names from history that stand out are obviously going to be Stefano and Nanua. Nanua has the insane consistency and the longevity and the performance throughout multiple expansions of StarCraft 2 and multiple metas of StarCraft 2, and he did it in Korea in GSL Code S. That's what gets him up there, but then he lacks a lot of the trophies, so therefore it makes it hard to make him the clear number one. Stefano has all the trophies, did amazing in the weekend tournaments, was godlike in the West, at one point in time was arguably a top 3, top 5 player in the world when his race was mad imbalanced and he could have used Infestor Broodlord, which to be fair, he didn't abuse as much as some of the others, the Nurture's, the Snoops of the world, but he definitely did abuse them and got a lot of championships off them early. So Stefano, because of the championships and the killer instinct and the clutch play, probably wins out. I think he's probably still number one. Seral's problem is his win rate looks fucking amazing. He's done very well against Koreans. He hasn't played Koreans as much, though. Koreans don't go to the big Western tournaments that he's playing in most of the time, or at least not the elite Koreans from Code S. Whereas, you know what? Stefano did win those tournaments with, like relevant GSL Code S champions in the field. Now, he didn't always play them directly and beat them, but he won those tournaments. So for me, Stefano still has to be edged right now. It's not Seral's fault. The fucking WCS regional lock-in's what prevents him having the chance to do it. And anyone now, quite frankly, having a chance to do it. Plus, he's done it. He's beaten the Koreans. He's won the big tournaments. When the Korean scene is at its least healthy, it is so weak and practically dead, if you look at eSports elsewhere in Korea, that it's depressing as fuck. Like, the part I can't handle about people crowing about foreigner victories now in StarCraft 2, go look at who the top players in Code S play for, the top Koreans. They play for Western orgs I have never heard of, and I've been in esports for 16 or 17 years professionally. Anyway, Barbara Stanwyck's Legs says, in a previous AMA on Patreon, you listed off your favourite duel maps from the Quake games. You explicitly excluded Quake Champions, citing the newness of the game. However, you did not mention any Quake 4 maps. Was this a mere slip, or do you hold contempt for the maps of that game and thus could not name any favourites? Right, I actually think Quake 4 was a legitimately shit game. Like, I don't even think it was average. I do think once they patched it up, like a year and a half into the game, it got all right, but I never thought it was aesthetically pleasing. I thought it was kind of cobbled together mishmash of Quake 3 and Quake 4 elements, and yet inferior to both. I think the fact that someone like like Toxic could literally just play the game by the numbers, play the map by the numbers, and just run fucking game on that scene just with godlike aim says a lot about it. The fact that like the Coolers of the world, the Avex of the world, couldn't really sort of break into the game with like a bit of strategical nous or intuitive play to the extent that someone like Toxic dominated. And then the fact that Sturmy even did quite well, again, playing a very simplistic, I win by brute forcing my aim against you. I thought that made the game kind of a bit boring, quite frankly. So I think it's not even a true Quake. Sure, we'll include the championships in there and say Toxic was a great player and Cypher and Avec and Cooler's accomplishments mean something. Yes, I will grant them that. Just as to some degree I grant the Quake Champions, which, by the way, I think Quake Champions is even worse than Quake 4. So my problem there is, I don't think many of the maps were good in that game, quite frankly. And I didn't particularly care for it as a game. So I don't think it comes anywhere close to the other Quakes. Right. Thomas Bushell says, hi, will you please do a preview similar to the CSGO ones for E-League, etc. So he means a video preview, but for Worlds, once everyone's qualified, of course. Also, where is Emily Rand? So yes, I will do a preview for Worlds. Whether it'll be my own video, you know what, I think I probably will do my own video, because I guess people on my channel, this is one of the epiphanies I've had recently. It might sound like a strange thing to have an epiphany of, but the problem is, unlike a lot of YouTubers, especially YouTubers with a lot of subscribers, I never really thought of my YouTube channel as its own thing, as in my subscriber base on YouTube, because I came up with my YouTube channel getting most of the hits from Reddit, and therefore I thought of the Reddit people and the hardcore eSports fans as my main base, my people watching my content, and that's who I was creating the content for in terms of the context and who I was kind of addressing. But what I've learned is, as my YouTube subscriber base has gotten big, and as Reddit, quite frankly, in terms of the vocal minority who comment there, is incredibly nitpicky and are just out to try and like prove that they can say one thing that you got wrong and therefore they think they know more than you. Actually, I've realized it is my subscriber base on YouTube who is the main audience. And that's why there are topics in videos where I might not have done them in the past, because I might have thought like, well, I mean, I'm not the most knowledgeable person on that topic, but I've realized people legit do just want to know my thoughts on topics and want to see from my perspective, since they've gotten to know my idiosyncrasies and my philosophies and principles that I follow. They want to know what I think on a topic. So I'm going to do that more. And in fact, I'm going to make more videos that even address something I talked about in an article, because not everyone reads the articles. Not everyone's into the hardcore side of things. I'm going to do a few more that are just opinions, just op-eds in that sense. So you know what? Yes, I probably will make my own video. But with that said, I will also get people like Emily Rand, like Kelsey Moser, to create some content with me where I draw out of them their predictions and their in-depth thoughts. But I'll probably separate the two out in terms of going balls deep on my part of it. I'll do that in my own video. So yeah, I will do that actually. And I'll try to do that a bit more often actually. I think it's filler content. It's not the most amazing content. But you know what? It gets your thoughts down on paper. You have to make the hard decisions. And people enjoy it as a preview, a shoulder content to the main tournaments themselves. So yeah, I will do it. In terms of where Emily Rand is, she's been very, very busy. First of all, with Overwatch stuff. Remember, she covers that game as well. She's actually one of the most active, diligent, hardworking journalists in the scene, and hasn't been available to do the League's Next World Champion show very much. But we'll fix that in the future, because that show is for her. That's a vehicle for her. So Jerky's Minion, one of my boys, one of the top contributors, says, what was your favourite movie growing up? Right, so obviously I'm not going to take literally growing up and be like one when I was an adult, because I was a fairly immature adult when I was younger. I'll go ahead with like legit when I was a kid. And so if I had to plump for one when I was a kid, I mean, there's a couple that are immediately coming to mind. It's hard to think of because, funnily enough, even though I'm someone who loves lists and figuring out what's the best, I don't think I ever did one when I was a kid, actually, because just used to love watching them all. But two that immediately are coming to mind. One has got to be The Never-Ending Story. What a fucking sick movie that is. That's still a fun movie to watch now. Now, you might need certain chemistry altered within your body to fully enjoy it now, but that is a fucking wicked movie. It's so imaginative. I love the fact, one aspect that they've lost in movies, things like Disney movies, Pixar movies, which I think makes them a little bit stale, is that now they've become like Spielberg movies, where there's one way to enjoy the movie. You're on the rails. You have to like this character. You have to dislike this character. You must feel this way about a certain character. Generally, you know things are going to work out. If they kill a character, they do it on purpose just to fuck with your emotions, and you can only feel this one emotion. And I've always thought that is both manipulative, quite frankly, almost propagandistic, and it's just shit filmmaking. Whereas what I liked about movies like The Never-Ending Story is there is actually a lot of grey area, and some of the main characters do things that are a little bit fucked up or make the wrong decision, and some of the evil characters or bad characters can have an element of honor to them or can do something in a way that's meaningful. Sure, you're not getting to like Game of Thrones / a Song of Ice and Fire level of like moral complexity, etc. But I like that aspect. So I like the fact that part of the twists and turns and some of the internal ethos of the movie can be very harsh and can have that almost Hans Christian Andersen element of it where you're like, bloody hell, that's brutal. But as much as that's shocking as a kid, it's fucking effective as well. It makes the rest of the movie really pop and have a strong emotional connection. As I say, so imaginative as a movie. I mean, it's just got almost no parallels to anything else I can think of as a movie. There's nothing close to it. Then you've got the other one that was coming to mind has got to be Superman 2. We're talking about the one where the Kryptonians get released from the Phantom Zone and they come to Earth and take over. What a fucking awesome movie. First of all, amazing plot. Sure, I don't mean amazing as in like some genius like fucking Christopher Nolan, Alan Moore, like, oh, the way it was constructed. But I mean amazing as in like, if you're watching it like a kid, like a superhero movie, a box office popcorn movie, it's a lot of fun. And it's so, like, this plays with your emotions in a way that's really satisfying. Sure, the concept of how that machine worked inside his fortress is patently stupid and absurd. Add in new powers where he could just, like, throw a red shield out of his chest for no reason and, like, block beams that he never had as power. Yeah, that's a bit wonky. That's because Hollywood didn't really know what they were doing with Superman back then. But all the rest of it's fucking amazing if you love Superman and does capture some of the best elements of like the Kryptonian mythos elements of the concept. So those are the two that are sticking out in my mind right now. Andreas Stensig says, with so many ongoing discussions regarding a possible Astralis era in the making, what are your criteria for an era, be it in CSGO or in esports in general? Right, so I don't think there's really any point saying for esports in general, because I think it goes game by game as to whether you had an era or not. In CSGO, this is something I'm putting some thought into, because I'm going to make a piece of kind of definitive content on what I think makes an era, so that I can make myself put it down on paper, really think about it, so then you're not moving between different ones and giving one person an era and taking one from another one. Like, for example, it's very tenuous, the SK era, because obviously they only won something like 4 tournaments during that period of time. I'm talking about 2016 here, but 2 of them were majors, and those are the biggest. So you know what I mean? Like, you really have to nail it down. I mean, by that criteria, sure, the major aspect helps. I mean, Very Games won more than that in their period of time, and they were getting the more final. You know, like, it gets really tough to kind of nail down. So the big problem is the only ones everyone can agree upon really is like definitely NIP and Fnatic had eras. Now, SK, I think most people would grant had an era, so we've got 3 eras so far. The rest of them were all probably flawed eras. Very Games, the first Astralis. Yeah, those probably envious. Those probably can't really be eras because someone else was more dominant or won more, or you didn't quite complete it. Like you had 1 or 2 tournaments that you let slip by, or you didn't win a major at the right time. So in CSGO, I do feel as though you could have an era without winning a major. You just have to be incredibly dominant in everything else outside of the major. So this Astralis lineup actually has a chance to do that, whether they win the major or not. For me, one thing I thought of as a criteria, I don't think anyone else has thought of as a thread to hold together an era, is it's not even just about winning. For me, you should be not just the dominant team of your era, which doesn't mean you have to win everything, by the way, but I feel like you should be the connecting thread of your era. So even if you don't win every tournament, the other titles should in some way go through you, or someone should have to beat you, or the fact that you weren't there is the only reason they were able to win the title. I think like when that is added into winning a lot of titles, a lot of finals, a lot of top 4s, and maybe a major, that's what's really going to solidify an era for me. When I think of those other teams, and then when I try to think of what someone would have to do now to get an era. So at the moment, Astralis is certainly fitting that criteria. I think maybe they need a title or more too. They've already looking like they're going to keep racking up the top 4 placings, the finals. If they can add a major, I think, yes, it's game over. They've got an era already. So I will put more thought into being specific about that and using the past eras to outline how I came to my criteria. And then hopefully we can use that in the future as a blueprint to figure out, has someone got an era? Are they going to have an era? Have they missed an era? Because obviously, for example, FaZe Clan, the lineup with Olofmeister, would be a great example of someone who missed an era. Despite winning a lot of championships, a lot of finals, a lot of top 4s, I think even if they'd have gotten a major, it would have been a little bit ropey to say that they'd had their era. So I think it's definitely a great discussion to have, and one of the more high-level discussions when we're taking in all of history in that sense. TMV23 says, recently there were a couple of show matches between human Dota 2 pros / high MMR players and OpenAI, which is an AI program playing against the Dota 2 in a modified version of Dota 2, limited hero pool and simplified rules. OpenAI initially won against a mix of high MMR players and was at least competitive in the match against pro teams. So while we are obviously not at that point yet where the AI can win against the best humans in the standard Dota format, that might happen in the foreseeable future. What do you think would be the possible implications, not specifically for Dota 2, but in a more general sense? For example, how and to what extent could pros use superior AI for training? Like, I think you even hit the nail on the head there. I'm not interested in whether or not AIs can beat humans. I mean, first of all, in a game like Counter-Strike and Quake, they definitely can, because you can just make them have aimbots. So I've never understood why that was supposed to be impressive, that you could like beat a human. You could literally make the computer be an aimbot. So I never understood exactly that parameter of what they were setting up there. In Dota 2, as you say, they made it such a limited version of the game that it's not really Dota 2, and it's not Team Dota 2, and you're not playing a real team, you're not playing a team that has synergy and strategy. Therefore, I don't again see what there is that you're bragging about from winning these games. If you play the full game of Dota 2 and against if you can beat Virtus Pro's lineup right now in a full game of Dota 2 with no limited parameters, then you know what, fair play, that would say something. But again, it would just say you made bots. Like, I don't really see what everyone thinks is so crazy here. Chess is different because there's no physical component. You have to just mentally be able to do that. And that's another problem I have with it, is when I look at the eSports example, specifically the Dota 2 one, it also seemed to win the AI by doing gimmicky shit over and over again. So don't have it play once. I want to see them play once, and then the next day the same top Dota team plays, and then a different top Dota team who watched those games plays it, and then another different top Dota team from the pro circuit who watched those other games plays it, and then goes on the next day. Then show me what the fuck your AI can do it. Because remember, we're not just talking about I've made an AI and it can win. They're claiming it's machine learning, and it's learning from the games it plays, and that's why it wins. So let's keep pumping in the great Dota players who themselves get to see what gimmick you're doing and respond to it. Otherwise, it's not that interesting. As you say, though, you hit the nail on the head. The one area it is interesting to me is the potential for training, because I would like to see a world in which you could set up an isolated lane and you could just lane against a specific type of AI that you set, for example, to mimic another player, or to play very aggressively, or to play very conservatively and never take a gamble, and you see if you can penetrate that or put them off. That would be where it's interesting, because that's an area of esports that is insanely underdeveloped. In games like Quake or StarCraft, certain top pros, like the Koreans entirely, for example, had like that map where you'd practice Mutalisk Micro. I remember in Unreal Tournament 2002, there was a guy called Infinite who had like a special map where it was just all like pick mips, so you couldn't see any of the textures, and he just practiced shafting using the lightning gun against enemies that he could see very easily, just to like practice his tracking him. Stuff like that. Those sorts of practice tools are very, very in demand, and there's not enough of a supply of them. Like, that's actually something, I never mentioned it publicly, where if I had been a coach, I planned to work with some community coders to make tools like that for my players. Now, this is in League of Legends, but I was planning on some interesting ways that we could have done that they could have practiced in a way no one else was practicing, and gained some edges in that way and warm up for games. Because that's one of the things about, for example, a game like League of Legends that's fucking whack, is like going and playing solo queue where you might not even get your role or the champions you want. It's a terrible way to practice. It's one of the most inefficient games in the world to practice from. So I always thought that was quite terrible. I would have made my own sort of X-Men War Room dojo type setting where people could really practice against what I wanted them to. So just something I was talking about there. So Mark says, this is a long question. This has a few layers to it, but can be asked in one broader question, but I'll elaborate further and you can answer to whatever extent. By the way, editorial here, I can answer however I want anyway, but okay, thanks for permission. Do you think there's a saturation issue in CSGO currently? Question I've been asked many times. Are there too many tournaments which make it harder to truly evaluate a team because of easier tournaments making them look better? Or does more performance make it easier as an analyst to evaluate teams? Also, increasing the number of tournaments, right? This is an example of where you're pretending you're asking me a question, but really you just want to tell me and everyone else your opinion. Like, you can do that, but it's better to just do that. Like, tell me your opinion first and then ask a question at the end. Like, these questions are like so loaded, it's unreal. Also, increasing number of tournaments means teams sometimes end up picking and choosing what events to go/work towards. Could this be holding back the game in terms of expanding to a wider audience? Would CSGO benefit from having a fixed schedule at the start of the year, wherever they may start in the calendar, or would that prove too difficult with the organizer tournament / player demands? Right? Is it oversaturated? I don't think so personally, because again, as you say, teams have a choice. They're the ones. It's the teams that make it oversaturated, not the tournaments. I want a tournament to exist where Tyloo can go and play just some tier, like some D and E class teams and win 50k. I think that's awesome for the health of the scene and the ecosystem. I like it that you have smaller tournaments like the DreamHack Open Circuit, which, to answer one of your questions, which I think help you as an analyst, because when you see North and Optic with their old lineups go to those tournaments and not win them and not perform outright, it helps you know that when they then play a top team and go 3 maps and a close series, you don't then say that they're automatically definitely like the 11th best team, because you know what? They're losing to teams that are way below that at the other tournaments and they're not winning them outright. So I think it gives you a better gauge. It's always good to have teams against a wide range of opponents to see where they're really at as a squad and who their style works against, how strong their maps really are from seeing against all opposition. So I don't have a problem with that personally. I like having more and more tournaments. The angle of teams don't get to practice properly. It depends what your team is. Mouse Sports and FaZe aren't going to be sat at home dry running a bunch of great shit anyway. They want to play all the time. Sure, Team Liquid, Astralis, North, G2, these two teams do want some time off. Well, you know what? Astralis is taking some time off. I think some of them, and also some of them don't qualify for every LAN anyway. So I think that takes care of itself. In terms of having a fixed schedule, I wouldn't mind it if you went the Dota Pro Circuit approach and you just gave some of the prize money and therefore we locked in 12 tournaments in the year that matter, and then of them, maybe 4 of them that are super important, and then the majors. I wouldn't mind that as long as you did it the right way. But at the moment, I also enjoy the open circuit when new tournaments like Brass Pro Series, Epicenter can come along and barge their way into the scene. E-League that you wouldn't have had if we'd set in place a Dota major circuit 2 years ago like they have. So at the moment, I'm happy with the way the scene is. I could see some ways to upgrade it, but I could also see people tinkering with that and fucking the system up entirely. So not necessarily a big fan. Right. Chung Yu Xiang says, who's your favourite actor / actress of all time? Now, this is an interesting piece of trivia for you here, which is I've always thought, funnily enough, maybe I'm with the feminists on this one, although you never hear feminists making this point. But why is there an actress award? Why is it not just actor? Because technically in the field of acting, an actress is not really supposed to be something that exists. You're all actors, male or female. It's not actually a gendered term originally. Now, I know why they added it, so that you could have more women win the award. But personally, I think they should compete against the men. It's acting. Why would they necessarily have a distinct disadvantage? It's not a physical sport. It's about acting, it's relating to a character, expressing that, having your own style. So sure, it's cool that more people get more awards, but I also think they should just compete head to head and let's just see who the best actor is, So who is my favorite actor of all time? Right, that's a tough one. I've got a few I can go with. I mean, one that I'm definitely very partial to, Orson Welles. What a fucking amazing actor when you see him in movies. Absolutely love to watch that guy. Daniel Day-Lewis. I know he hasn't done a lot of movies, but he's so good in some of the ones he has. I love the way he just embodies a role, takes it to the nth degree. He's got to be one of my favorites. Let's see. Like a lot of people, I enjoyed Robert De Niro when he was younger. The last 20 years can fuck 100% of the way off. But it doesn't ruin the first 20 years of his career. Who else should we go with? I mean, an underrated one for sure would be Mickey Rourke, because everyone raves about him now in his comeback over the last sort of 10, 15 years. But even when he was in exile, he was doing shitty movies in the 80s and 90s. I've seen a lot of those movies, and a lot of them are really good. Even when the movie's just a 5 out of 10 movie, he can be a 7 or an 8 out of 10 actor. That's how good he is. Actually, speaking of which, that's why Daniel Day-Lewis is so godlike. For example, Gangs of New York is an incredibly flawed movie. It's probably a 6 out of 10 level movie. He's a fucking 9 out of 10 in that movie. He is unbelievable as Butcher Bill. So I generally like people who are so exceptional. It's not even about how good the movie is with these guys. Let me think if I can pick one more person I'd like to put in this list. Who else would I like to put on the list? Greatest actors of all time, or favorite actors rather. Yeah. I think we've got a pretty good selection so far. Thing is, I'm actually not someone where someone being in a movie makes them my favorite. So as in the movie doesn't have to be my favorite movie for the actor to be my favorite movie. So is there one more I want to go with here? You know what? People hate on him a lot, and he's certainly done some movies that weren't that good. But when he's on his game, Fucking Russell Crowe could get it. That guy was a fucking beast. There's a lot of actors from the old days, by the way, that are very, very sick. It's just that Hollywood was a little bit more set in stone back then, so it's kind of hard to... Like, for example, like James Cagney is amazing in almost everything he did, but a lot of those movies do not hold up and look really ropey now, so I can't really say he's my favourite, can he? Right, Andrew says... By the way, you just got a little insight there as to what my second Patreon will be like when I make it for my side channel, because that is coming in the next few months. With the change to 2 majors a year, this is from Andrew, do we need to rethink how we award teams and eras? So we're actually referring to an earlier question here. The SK era of 2016 lasted for a bit over 3 months. MLG Columbus to ESL1 Cologne. In that period, they played 5 large tournaments, winning 3, with 2 being the majors. Put into the 2017 and 2018 major system, they wouldn't have played a single major during their era. He means like during the time span, because it was like late March to like July. Interested to hear your thoughts. Now, that's one of the problems with this whole era thing. Like, for example, not only would NIP have had an era way earlier, I mean, they probably should have an era anyway, even though there were no majors during the time they were actually playing at their best. But that is one of the issues, right? If we're going to unduly favour majors, then now there's like an element of lock as to when a major is. Like in CS 1.6, most years had 3 majors and they were spread out over the year. So if you were the best team in the world for a solid 3 to 4 months, you're going to get a shot at a major. As you say quite correctly, if someone had been the best team in the world from February to August, they would not have played in a major. So they could have won every tournament. And someone who's like, you got to win a major, would say they can't be a major, an era-defining team. Well, I think they can be. And so to kind of answer your question, I don't think it's necessary. I do think it's the most important tournament. So unfortunately, Lock does now play a part in it, which is a shame that there aren't 3 majors. It's also something quite unfair, quite frankly, because think about it. Fnatic basically had the best period in time to potentially get a major because they had 3 majors a year, as well as all the other tournaments and as well as the 250k tournaments really coming online. So I guess actually Fnatic had an unfair advantage in that particular sense. But history's like that. You know what? Some great tennis players back in the day don't have as many Grand Slams as they should have done because people didn't used to go to the Australian Open, which, because it's now a major, a Grand Slam, gets retroactively counted as like one of the big tournaments, but back then people didn't give a fuck about it. So there's certain players who'd have a lot more Australian Open titles and a lot more Grand Slams who now fuckers are going to tell you that like, oh, Stan Wawrinka's better than that guy. It's like, is he fucking not? Are you out of your mind? So yeah, that's just unfortunately the nature of sport. You're not going to have uniform circumstances. Shikez says, do you think longer player breaks, like the one before the London Major, are substantially more beneficial to teams like Astralis that are built around solid tactics? Conversely, do they negatively impact teams built up on skill? Or do you think it's more of a dice roll as to which teams come out on top? Right? I don't think player breaks, as in real player breaks, where people go on holiday, benefit anyone at all. The only reason MIBR's benefited because they sort of cheated. They just skipped part of the player break and started playing tournaments in it. So yeah, unsurprisingly, not having much of a break will help you. I don't think it helps Astralis at all. I think you saw that their level dipped down. They've already lost three maps in this tournament in the group stage. So no, I don't think it helped them. And I think having a player break before a major is a terrible idea if you want to have high quality Counter-Strike at the major. Have the player break after the major, for fuck's sake. As you say, though, obviously the teams that in theory should be better are the ones that play off skill anyway. I actually think, if anything, it hurts. Having a proper break hurts the teams that want to practice. Teams like Astralis didn't need a break. They already were having time off anyway. Elliot Hoskaya says, who would you say are the top 5 players in CSGO at this moment? Okay, here we go. This is actually a piece of content I should start doing again, because I did one edition of it, like top 5 players of the world, and then I just never did another. It's easy content to make. I just didn't get around to it. But I'm doing my writing shit now. So you know what? We'll do this quite simply. Number 1. Still easy enough to do. It's simple. He's the best player in the world. A bad day for him is as good as anyone else is going to have for a good day on this list, quite frankly. With the exception of number 2, because number 2 is also clear-cut for me. It is Nico from FaZe Clan. He is playing unbelievable Counter-Strike. I actually feel bad for him, because with Cold Zero not being quite at his old level, he's just unlucky to live in the era of simple. Because I put it this way, you put this Nico into Olaf Meister's era, into Get Right's era, I think actually he might be the best player in the world in their era, and it'd be his era as the best player. That's how unreal he is playing. Now, sure, they had impact on the game in some ways that he's maybe not doing, but I think his style of play is amazing. He's a clutch player. He's great on pistol rounds, so good with every sort of weapon. His ops actually somewhat underrated, quite frankly. The guy's just a fucking beast. What more do you want me to say? So he's number 2. Number 3, I think you've got to give it to Device. Now, here's the thing. He doesn't pop off as much as many of the names on this list, but his impact to his team is unbelievable. Like, he genuinely might be the most efficient player in Counter-Strike right now. He contended with coldzera for of all time. I'll give Prime coldzera the edge right now, but incredibly efficient. Just gets the kills he's meant to and a few more, gets kills and backs off and gives his team the advantage, controls an area so they can attack somewhere else using process of elimination, knowing no one can be there. If you come into his area, he scouts you, he fox you. I mean, like, he scouts where you're going to be. He gets his kill. So effective. Doesn't lose ops and necessarily saves ops in all the correct situations. If you're an in-game leader, attacking the main leader, he is your dream AWPer. Good on every map. Good on both sides of every map. Doesn't overextend. Plays exactly within his bounds. And is a high-skilled player and gets all the kills he needs anyway. And he's fucking clutch. What more do you want from the guy? It's unbelievable the advantages he gets. So he's my clear number 3. The last 2 is where it gets a bit trickier, because I think I'm going to go for number 4. This is where it gets tough. Because think about it. We've got coldzera. We've got Electronic. We've got Sonny. Who are we going to go with on this one? A few months back, we would have had Oscar. This is a rough one, right? Because I don't think like Valde can be in there. He hasn't played enough tier 1 tournaments with his team. Who else have we got in the equation? I don't think anyone from Team Liquid makes the list right now. A bunch of them have dropped off. They haven't been consistent enough. Is there anyone else who's even good in the world? Right, I think we're going to decide for these last 2 between coldzera, Sonny, and Electronic. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say Electronic for this one, because I do think if he didn't have Simple in his team, he couldn't be like the main hard carry in Army. I don't think it would work right now. But what, as a sidekick, holy fuck is he OP. Because he's not only a very high level fragger, but he is so methodical in his game. He wins so many clutches, so many like mid-round, the equivalent of a clutch, where it's like he gets the 2 kills at this spot that just win you the round entirely. Big time plays. Clutches don't have to all be at the end of the game, even though that is a term, obviously. He plays in a clutch manner. And because he's stable, you can rely on him. Simple, stable because he gets the kills, but he's very unpredictable in his playing style. So actually, I think he complements Simple and is a perfect sidekick for him. And those two just hard carry Na'Vi sometimes on T side. So I've got to put him up there. What an amazing player. Then for the 5th one, I'm basically going between coldzera and Sonny here. And the problem is, I feel like Sonny's play recently has been really nice, and I want to give it to him, but I can't deny coldzera. I know his team hasn't been that good recently, but he's been fucking amazing. I still think he's very, very high level. He's so clutch. I can't imagine how shit this team would be without him. I don't think they'd even be a top 10 team, despite the talent. I still think the guy is a master of the game. You've got to respect greatness when you see it. His all-around game is so polished, so great. I respect that he has the work ethic to keep grinding, even when some of his team wasn't, and his team was having bad results, and they were very dysfunctional. I didn't like when he became in-game leader, but you know what? That's not right now. So I'm going to give it to coldzera, my 5th spot. And I think, actually, if MIBR improves, he's got a real chance to go higher up on this list again and really contend, even though for now, no one can really fuck with Simple. Stained Class, what makes you rate the 9 Inch Nails double album, The Fragile? There's not that many questions on this one, so I'll answer a few of these like lifestyle ones. What makes you rate the 9 Inch Nails double album, The Fragile, so highly? It's a very weird question because, I mean, the obvious answer is I really like it and a lot of the songs. I myself love the entirety of it, particularly the 2 instrumentals, just like you imagined, and Complication. So, okay, I'll tie it into that. The reason I think that album's the best is because I think it shows the most depth and the most variety of musical composition style and styles of music. And I think that's the one where Trent Reznor really showed what a complete musical artist he is. And I'm not surprised that the mainstream didn't really rate it and bagged on it and were like, oh, give me more like the Downward Spiral. Because that is what people do in this commercialized, like product world where they're like, right, you are in this category. Now just give me 10 more albums of that, like you're the fucking Ramones or something. Like, no, what I like about Trent Reznor is he's an artist. And so this was his evolution musically. And I think some of his most mature, deep, meaningful music he ever created. His earlier albums are sick. Downward Spiral's an amazing album, but it's very much within certain lines. It's got a particular theme to it. It doesn't veer too much outside of that. This is an album that takes a lot of chances. It's incredibly ambitious. Even if you don't like it as much as I do, it's a flawed gem at the very worst, right? It's like, for example, I mentioned earlier Orson Welles, one of my favorite directors of all time. So one of his movies that is definitely not like an all-time great movie, but it's got something to it, and so it's a flawed gem, would have to be Dr. Arkadin, The Confidential Report. This is a movie that has lots of flaws. A lot of it's a bit ropey and doesn't hang together, but some elements of it are really good. Some elements are compelling. And so, yeah, it's still a movie you enjoy watching. So I personally think The Fragile is his masterpiece, his magnum opus, but some people don't. So I would say at least give it credit as a flawed gem. So I think it's a fantastic album. I also like, yes, that it had some of those more instrumental elements to it. It wasn't just about singing and that aesthetic of like the goth industrial post-punk type shit. Firestar. What are your thoughts on the mess of a tournament format that occurred at QuakeCon 2018? Single elimination bracket stage seeded by 2v2 deathmatch results, which were a best of 7. The grand final was a best of 1, 1v1. Do you think that Quake Champions has any promise going into the future now it's free to play? Right, I'll answer those questions in reverse. Does it have any promise? No. As I've said a million times, it's a game with no audience. Even Quake players don't like it. It has so many flaws in the structure of how the eSports side is done. I don't think the concept's particularly entertaining, and I think it's got so many flaws in it overall. Now, in terms of the QuakeCon seeding, right, QuakeCon has never actually built itself as a big esports tournament. It's always said it's a community tournament for people who attend the LAN, who are Quake fans and fans of id Software games. So to be fair, I don't judge it on the same scale in that context. But as an objective judgment, yes, obviously it's incredibly flawed as an esports tournament. It's often had dodgy seeding and silly entry rules where pros couldn't always register from their country. And I think some of the change-up of format over the years has been a bit wacky. I don't particularly care for 2v2. I think it's an inferior version of 4v4, and it's not as exciting as 1v1. So 1v1's the main mode I want to see there. And yes, it was whack to see that best of 1 final. It was like 10 minutes long. Wasn't really worthy of the great QuakeCon finals of old. And in the modern day, I don't think cuts it for esports competition. So I think QuakeCon was pretty whack. I think Quake Champions is super whack. And I think the future of Quake esports is fucking dire right now, sadly. AHQ, what is the criteria for choosing the co-host for your shows? I don't expect the pool of candidates to choose is very big, but I wonder if there's a bigger picture behind the talk show. So I actually did address this in a video I've done in the meantime where I talked about talk shows, and I explained that, for example, unless it's something like Monte Cristo, where that's someone, obviously, it's a friend of mine, fellow thinker who I admire. We just work together very well. It's easy to see why we'd do a show together still. Similar with Richard. Moses is someone where I guess he falls in the same category. But for other people, Kelsey, Emily, I did that just to make vehicles for them. Same as I did with Scrilluminati when she wasn't doing the LPL. I made incoming aggression with her. So the problem in a game like League of Legends is, except for Summon and Insight, I've never made a show in that game that was based around having a co-host who I picked just to be the best and to be the best talk show material. I've had times where I could have done shows with certain people who were some of the more loved guests on my shows. You can think of some of them who were Korean or stay in the Korean region or are great thinkers or have good banter. Yes, I could. I just haven't had a point in time where it felt like the right time to make that show or I had the impetus to make that show. Maybe I'll do it in the future. We'll see where things go. But I won't stop making my shows with Emily and Kelsey as long as they want to keep making them. So it would have to be a side show with a different theme. Not impossible, though. Generally, I just do shows with people I want to do them with or I think are interesting. I don't go out there trying to make like the biggest blockbuster show, the marquee show, and get all the views. If the views come, cool. If they don't, we'll just have our little niche. I'm not somebody who's trying to get the most views in the world, basically. Spoonfed89. When looking at the greatest players of all time and their respective careers, someone like Device has been consistently excellent for many years without ever being the clear-cut best player in the world outside of a short period where Olofmeister had a higher peak of play but has fallen off recently. How do you value these minute differences among the best players when deciding who was better? So basically, what you're alluding to, but didn't specifically state here, is there is a problem where someone has the longevity that where they, for example, were top 5 for like 5 years in a row. I mean, Device, that's not quite that case. In his case, it was more like let's say, maybe just over 3 years, he was like a clear-cut top 5 player the whole time. So the problem there is, does being top 5 the whole time beat out being like the clear best for almost a year, like Olaf Meister, or being the clear best to debatable best for 2 straight years, like Coldzera, because, 3 is bigger than 2, and 3 is definitely a lot bigger than 1. It's certainly a factor, and it counts against those guys that they didn't have the same longevity. But you're right, if you weren't ever the best player, and yet you were the third best for 3 straight years, does it make sense to say that you're the best overall because you never were the best at any one point in time? It's kind of a bit illogical, right? There's a paradox or some kind of something to be resolved there. So I'm with you on that one. I don't think longevity should be the ultimate deciding factor. With that said, I certainly think if you're doing a top 10 of all time list, it helps Device and puts him real high up on that list, like a top 5 player for clear. Yes, he's lacked the gear to become the clear-cut number 1 player. That is interesting. So I do think that it's harder to rank players like him, but I think the consistency does count for something, and excellent in his own way. It's a bit like Nico at the moment. He's not the best player, but he's so insane. He's better than some of the best players we had in past years. So that counts for something, right? It's more about when you're weighing them up objectively in history. Gyaru says, what are your thoughts on major grand finals retaining a best of 3 format despite other tournaments using best of 5? And could increasing the amount of regulation rounds in the final be a solution to improve the value of winning a major? Okay, I think all majors should be best of 5 final, because even if you don't like best of 5 finals, I agree some tournaments overuse them. I generally like them all the time. I just like to see who's the most dominant, and you can really dominate a team more in a best of 5 final. I like to see more maps played, less of the pick ban having a direct implication on the final. Let's just see who the best teams are on a whole bunch of the maps, and without the ability to just cheekily ban shit out. I also think for the major, let's just make it harder. Like, if Cloud9 could have won a best of 5 over FaZe, I already don't really complain about them winning the major, but I think it was fluky. I'd have a hard time saying it's a fluke if they won a best of 5 over fucking FaZe Clan. Which, by the way, they could have done, because they could have won that Mirage game, so they could have 3-0'd that final. So I would say it's more decisive, it shows dominance more, it shows how close teams really are more, and I'd like it to be the final hurdle for a major, so that then if you do win a major, and you're not an unlikely team to, I've got to tip my hat no matter what then. I can give you reasons as to why Cloud9 was a bit fluky winning that major. Doesn't mean they didn't deserve it, or whatever the fuck all those words are, because they're so loaded, it's crazy anyway. But it would be more definitive if they won with a best of 5 final. Pavel says, by what criteria do you judge the quality of films? What things do you think modern films, either generally or in a specific case, do better than older films? What would you like to see incorporated in future films to make them a better experience? I mainly just go on what the viewing experience intuitively feels like. So there's many movies that are old movies that are fucking amazing movies. And it doesn't matter to me that they don't have special effects and all the other, like for example, the Russian Solaris, I think it's from 1972 or something, right? By the great Andrei Tarkovsky. This is a sci-fi movie with very little in terms of special effects. Doesn't hold up in terms of some of the visual aspects, but it's a thinking man's movie. It creates an atmosphere that's very unique, and it plays with ideas well. So it's a lot better than a lot of fabulous, visually stunning sci-fi movies, or even good sci-fi movies from the last 20, 30 years, despite the fact it can't live up in that respect. So I don't care so much about special effects. I care more about if I buy the idea. You go watch an old Terry Gilliam movie from the 80s. There's no CGI, and you can see it's a puppet on half the creatures, but he makes the atmosphere believable, so your brain can suspend disbelief and buy that that's an actual creature. Same with the Neverending Story movie I referred to earlier. You can enjoy that movie and believe these are characters, even though they're clearly puppets and they're being moved by some fucking strings and a guy with its arm up its arse. So I have no problem enjoying old movies, new movies, any movies. Like, I'm not someone with movies or music that thinks about like what the latest is or tries to stay up to date with the latest. I just try to consume all the great shit from any period in time, and I love to dive back in time. Like, for example, in music, I spent a lot of my time in the 70s with like prog rock, for example, or the 80s with certain synth stuff, so drum and bass, obviously the early 2000s. So yeah, I don't really give a fuck about time zone as much as I care about where the good shit is and going and harvesting that. So in terms of what they do better, obviously graphics, obviously things like you can do a lot more, because the budget can be lower, and you can, like, for example, Prime is a great example. You could never make a great movie like that on that budget 20 years, 30 years early. You couldn't even afford the camera equipment. So I think definitely a lot of the more gonzo, the more like recreational use camera type movies opened the field up a lot more. You can do a lot more overall. It's the same as I can do this on a YouTube channel right now and get loads of views, where I've had to like be on fucking television to get that many views 25 years ago, but I don't have to do it now. So there's certain things they do better. Some of the things they do worse is, well, obviously they pander a lot more to like the buying public and focus groups and stupid shit like that, instead of just making movies which don't always hit but are straight fire, like Touch of Evil or something amazing like that, right? So, last question. Jake Rizika says, in your 3 columns of Counter-Strike, you call Neo probably the most skilled CS player of all time, right? I'm almost certain you've mistaken there and that you're thinking of Forrest, but I was wondering if you meant that in regards to CS 1.6 and not through all of CS. I didn't watch during 1.6, but I'm having trouble seeing someone as more skilled than current Simple. If Neo is more skilled, what aspects does he beat out Simple in? Right, first of all, when I say Counter-Strike, I generally do mean 1.6. I consider that the real Counter-Strike. CSGO is a worse version of 1.6 as far as I'm concerned, but it's distinct in its own right. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's quite a cheap gimmick, actually, to try and rate people across both games, because then you have players that were way better than certain players ever were in CSGO from 1.6, but didn't play CSGO. What? So they automatically get eliminated, do they? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So Forrest, I would say, is maybe still the most skilled CS player of all time. I think Simple's approaching it, but I want to see like maybe another year of it out of him, and then I can live with him being better than the 1.6 players. 1.6 is a better game, a more skilled game in my opinion, with more versatility. Therefore, it's hard for CSGO players to match up. But you know what? People like Simple, people like Nico, people like Kenny S are pushing the boundaries to the extent I'm starting to actually contrast them directly with the 1.6 greats and even start to rate some of them higher. So yeah, it happens eventually. I agree. I don't know if anyone can be more skilled than Simple. Then again, you know what? I'll throw this out there. There was absolutely no implication of cheating around any all-time great players in 1.6, as there is in CSGO, and there are clips that look a bit dodgy in CSGO. I've never seen a clip in 1.6 that looked dodgy from the great players. So that's not a big factor, but I'll put that out there as a tertiary factor, because the difference is we're not ever going to find out that anyone was cheating in 1.6 and that great player was a fraud. That may yet happen in CSGO, not referring to Simple directly necessarily. That's the end of the episode. We've got through all the questions. If you want to ask a question for the next one, which will be coming up very soon as a thread on the Patreon page, donate $10 or more and get all the exclusives. Ask me a question in this. Depending on how much you earn, you could be part of a discussion with me each month. You can talk about my content with me and I'll answer things in the comments section on the Patreon page. You can submit ideas or guests you'd like to see in my content at the Patreon in the description below. Donate whatever amount you're comfortable. If not, just enjoy the content, no problem. This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, godawfulwasteofspace, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear in my content? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers for upcoming content and guests? Want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today. Link in the description box.